Christopher Columbus did not discover America. Exactly. I mean, never mind the question of like how you can discover a place where the inhabitants are watching you arrive from the shore. They weren't wearing pants. Is that what somebody said? I like that.
Blacks as we know them are as old as time, and their existence in the civilized world could be traced down to the very early centuries, even before the coming of Christ. Going forward, the conventional history reports that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. And the same history also says that the first black people to arrive America were enslaved Africans brought by Portuguese and Spanish traders in the early 16th century through the transatlantic slave trade. Well, none of these claims are true. We've been fooled all these while, as always has been the case. Interestingly, recent research has proven that some black people had been in America for more than 1,000 years before Columbus ever stepped foot into the American continent. In fact, there is strong evidence pointing to the fact.
What is the main idea in your book, They Came Before Columbus?
The main idea in my book is to show that early America before the coming of Columbus, was a far more complex society than people imagined, and that it involved Africans. Africans came in here. They came in on several occasions. Sometimes these were accidents, sometimes they were on purpose, and that they had an influence, an actual impact, an influence upon the formation of certain American civilizations.
When we say pre-Columbus period, what are we talking about?
We're talking about long before 1492. It is absurd, and only fools can still believe that Columbus discovered the Americas in 1492. In fact, Columbus never even came to this continent. Columbus wandered about in the Caribbean islands just on the very edge of the great civilizations.
Shocked? Don't be. It is true. Unraveling the raw truth behind the curtains of history is what we are about today in this video. Journey with us in our quest to find out just who the real lords of the Americas actually are.
So anyway, there were actually many other mariners before Columbus that discovered America as well. Decades earlier, even eons earlier, there were so many people that were coming across these islands and this continent. But it's only been in the last century that evidence has surfaced and continually grown to indicate that many of these pre-Columbian explorers might have come from Africa.
The facts point out that black people actually it was who were in America thousands of years before Columbus. Before we go on, do not forget to support our efforts by hitting the like button before you. Share with your friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and consider subscribing to stay with us for more if you are yet to. All right, let us dive in, shall we?
That many of these pre-Columbian explorers might have come from Africa. So the first scientist to promote this possibility was Leo Wiener. Born in Russia, Wiener immigrated to the United States in the late 19th century on his way to British Honduras, where he planned to open a vegetarian commune. Well, when that turned out not to be the dream job he expected, he moved back to the United States and he became a professor at Harvard University, as one does. But in his time in Mesoamerica, he started noticing things. There were lots of things that led him to encounter certain discoveries that made him consider that possibly if the origins of American civilization might actually be in Africa. So he observed so many linguistic and botanical and other similarities that between 1920 and 1922, he published an extensive 3-volume piece called Africa and the Discovery of America. Now, unfortunately, this is the 1920s, so as yet, no serious archaeological evidence had been done or work had been done to support his botanical theories, because everyone was over raiding tombs in Egypt and things like that. Nod to Howard Carter. So he didn't have a whole lot of other stuff than the names to support him. However, he knew that other clues must exist. For example, he pointed out that Columbus himself was aware that African mariners had preceded him. In his diary of his second voyage, Columbus tells of how the natives of Hispaniola actually had given him gold-tipped metal spearheads that they said were brought by black-skinned people who had come in large boats from the south and southeast. Coincidence? I think not. No. So what's interesting about that, so upon returning to Spain, is that he actually took the spearheads and he sent them away and they had them assayed, and it turned out to be that these spearheads were covered in this metal this alloy that the inhabitants called guanin, and the metallurgists actually found out that this was an alloy of 32 parts. It was like 18 of gold, 6 of silver, 8 of copper, which matched the metal used in spearheads made in Western Africa for thousands of years, as carried by medieval African warriors, including the Mali and the Moors. The West Africans even called this metal guanine, the same name used by the natives of Hispaniola. But nothing more was said about that. Conspiracy. Well, probably because, in the interest of Spain, it was in their best interest that they didn't want to have any challenges to their discovery and the claims of the islands of the West Indies.
You heard that. Yes, it was the black-skinned that had already discovered and populated America for thousands of years, before Columbus sailed there and then landed in the Caribbean by some mistake. Columbus landed in the Americas on October 12th, 1492. He landed at a small island in the Bahamas and had 3 separate trips after that, repeatedly returning to the Bahamas, as well as an island later called Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti, and Dominican Republic. Suffice it to say that he had brought hell to the people who had welcomed him with open arms in the Republic when he got there. This has always been a signature, right?
Christopher Columbus, one of the great European heroes, turns up on the island of Hispaniola. He was welcomed by the native people. They embraced them, they treated them with fantastic hospitality. His soldiers snatched babies from the breasts of their mothers and dashed their heads against the rocks. Children were fed alive to his dogs. Women's breasts were cut off. He decided to hang 13 of the Native Americans in Hispaniola to recreate the crucifixion of Jesus, plus the apostles. It's true that the majority of people died there of disease. Disease is introduced by the Europeans unwittingly, but many others were driven to death through overwork, direct murder, through starvation as their resources were taken away. Columbus insisted that everybody bring him a certain amount of gold, and those who failed to do so had their hands cut off. Some were sent back to their villages with their hands and their noses tied around their necks, having been amputated by his soldiers. And what he did there set the pattern for the genocidal extermination of almost all the Native American peoples. 100 million before Columbus made landfall. By the 19th century, that had come down to less than 1 million across the Americas. Overtly endorsed by such revered figures as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who wrote about the necessity of wiping out Native American peoples.
Let us not veer too far away, however, from the actual subject of discourse going forward here. The point being buttressed is, the people who were originally known to have discovered America are not only Africans, but are believed to have also come from Asia some 15,000 years ago, meaning that Europeans or Americans are far from it. However, contrary to popular belief, African American history did not start with slavery in the New World. The history of African presence in America dates back thousands of years before the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492. Africans were not just brought to America as slaves during the transatlantic slave trade, but they had actually been living in the Americas long before European colonization. So, while we commend Christopher Columbus for sailing the seas in search of new land on Europe's behalf, it should be recalled that he was not the first to make that journey, as widely untaught evidence exists, suggesting that Africans made it to the Americas after the first Americans arrived on the continent, centuries before Columbus ever did.
As the poem goes, or it should anyway, in 1493, Columbus stole all he could see. Yeah, so on his second voyage, which was 10 times larger than the first, Columbus went on a frantic but unsuccessful island hopping trip to find gold and spices. He carried along several natives from his newly discovered San Salvador, which the inhabitants called Guanahanvi. Another island that the natives pointed out, which was really large, and was called Soameto. Soameto. Now, Columbus continued going around whimsically renaming every island he could find, but Leo Wiener, being the curious person and the linguist that he was, and the etymologist, he couldn't help noticing that the origin of these many place names and botanical names in Mesoamerica actually sounded distinctly like other languages in Africa, particularly Bantu and even Arabic.
In fact, there are several more overwhelming pieces of evidence showing that black history in the Americas did not start with slavery. For instance, what of the talk about certain plants found today in America and also in Africa?
Wiener and numerous other botanists have also puzzled over the presence of certain plants that predated Columbus but originated in Africa. For example, the calabash bottle gourds. Now, this is a species originally from West Africa, where they were well cultivated in America before Europeans arrived. Now, even long before they existed in Indonesia or Polynesia. So, in fact, the Pacific was the last place that bottle gourds actually reached and expanded to. Pardon my covfefe. Well, if it were not for transatlantic trade, pre-Columbian times, it would be very difficult to explain how certain plants, such as the yam, the sweet potato, domesticated cotton, peanuts, and tobacco, reached both West Africa and the Americas.
Africans were adept shipbuilders. They were courageously adventurous, sailing diverse parts with their well-made boats, different sizes of them. Some housed up to 80 men and some housed much more.
So how do these plants and languages and other cultural elements get to the Americas? Well, some believe, so what's that? Well, you're cheating. Well, some people believe that, over thousands of years, Africans migrated out of Africa and then over the Bering Strait, then down into South America, and things like that. Well, another explanation exists, and so get ready. There you go. Let it out of your system. Awesome. Africans had ships. In fact, they had four kinds of. They had unbelievable. They had a shipload of vessels, and they had away. The anchors way. So, in fact, they had four kinds of vessels, and Nubian pottery. This is an example of Nubian pottery with a painting on it that shows a long-hold pottery art. That shows either a long-hold boat or a papyrus raft or a hauled-out canoe. And then this other painting beside it is from, the first one was from 3000 BC, and this is a bird's-eye view of an oared riverboat in Chad. And it dates from 3500 BCE. Now, the Africans of Guinea also had dugout canoes hewn from these monumental trees on the coast there. In 1500, that's just a few years after Columbus's voyage, the Portuguese captain Pacheco Pereira wrote, "In this country can be found the largest canoes made of a single trunk. Some are so large that they hold 80 men." Now, the West Africans were known to lash two dugout canoes together, side by side, and no one questions the seaworthiness of a similar type of Polynesian catamarans. Well, here's a 15th century Portuguese painting of sailing canoes on the Congo estuary. The Portuguese, like Captain Pereira, had heard that African traders were visiting Brazil in the mid-1400s. So to demonstrate that mariners from West Africa could have sailed to the Americas using papyrus vessels as early as 2000 BCE, Norwegian adventurer Tor Heyerdahl actually used ancient shipbuilding techniques in order to construct and sail the Ra 1 and the Ra 2 in 1969 and 70. And generally, some type of sailing vessel will average about 100 miles per day, even without sails.
Africans were in fact so good at what they do that mariners from West Africa would sail to the Americas using papyrus vessels as early as the year 2000 BCE. They were so well skilled in ancient shipbuilding techniques that some of their sailing vessels would average about 100 miles per day, even without sails. And in an ocean current, something like a raft or reed boat can average about 60 miles a day. Historian Amir Ajib reported that voyages west from Mali were happening in the year 1311. And this was a vast 150 years before Columbus.
Now, Islamic historian Amir Hajib reported that voyages west from Mali were happening in the year 1311, just 150 years before Columbus. Now, when he asked the Mali emperor, shown here, incidentally, holding a globe of the world made of solid gold, asked him, well, tell me about this rumor about Atlantic travel. And he said that his predecessor had commissioned an expedition with 200 ships filled with men and a similar number with gold and water and enough provisions for 2 years. And he said, go out and find something. And if you don't come back, so you find something or you run out of food. And unfortunately, only one ship returned, and the captains told the emperor that we sailed for a very long time until we met what seemed like a river with a strong current flowing in the open sea. I was the last ship, and I turned where I was and did not enter the current. The others disappeared. I do not know what became of them.
Overwhelming pieces of evidence. The strongest evidence of African presence in America before Columbus comes from the pen of Columbus himself. According to an American historian and linguist, Leo Weiner of Harvard University, one of the strongest pieces of evidence to support the fact that Africans sailed to America before Christopher Columbus was a journal entry from Columbus himself. In 1920, Leo Weiner, in his book, Africa and the Discovery of America, explained how Columbus noted in his journal that Native Americans had confirmed that
black-skinned people had come from the southeast in boats trading in gold-tipped spears.
It was found also that the ratio of properties of gold, copper, and silver alloy were identical to the spears then being forged in African Guinea. It is said that the inhabitants of Hispaniola were the ones to confirm this to Columbus, as he wrote in his journal of the second voyage. Other explorers like Vasco Núñez de Balboa, a Spanish explorer who was best known for crossing the Isthmus of Panama to the Pacific Ocean in 1513, also reported sighting black people off Panama. There were dark-skinned people in the Caribbean long before the Atlantic slave trade and long before the arrival of Columbus. But there are some historians that say Columbus was misinterpreted. He simply said there were people that painted their skins black, which might suggest that Native Americans were the ones with the painted faces he was referencing. One of the first documented instances of Africans sailing and settling in the Americas were black Egyptians, led by King Ramses III during the 19th dynasty in 1870-92 BC. In fact, in 445 BC, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs' great seafaring and navigational skills. Further concrete evidence noted by an Egyptian chancellor to the King Djoser, Dr. Imhotep, and largely ignored by Eurocentric archaeologists, includes Egyptian artifacts found across North America, from the Algonquin writings on the East Coast to the artifacts and Egyptian place names in the Grand Canyon. In 1311 AD, another major wave of African exploration to the New World was led by King Abubakar II, the ruler of the 14th century Mali Empire, which was larger than the Holy Roman Empire. The king sent out 200 ships of men and 200 ships of trade material, crops, animals, cloth, and crucially, African knowledge of astronomy, religion, and the arts. African explorers crossing the vast Atlantic waters in primitive boats may seem unlikely, or perhaps far-fetched to some. But such incredible nautical achievements are not as daunting as they seem, given that numerous successful modern attempts have illustrated that without an oar, rudder, or sail, ancient African boats, including the dugout, would certainly have been able to cross the vast ocean in a matter of weeks. As time allows us to drift further and further away from the European age of exploration, and we move beyond an age of racial intellectual prejudice, historians are beginning to recognize that Africans were skilled navigators long before Europeans, contrary to popular belief. Of course, some Western historians continue to refute this fact because consciously or unconsciously, they are still hanging on to the 19th century notion that seafaring was a European monopoly. After all, history will tell you that seafaring is the quintessential European achievement, the single endeavor of which Europeans are awfully proud of. Seafaring allowed Europe to conquer the world. So the notion that black Africans braved the roaring waters of the Atlantic Ocean and beat Europeans to the New World threatens a historically white sense of ownership over the seas. Also, when most people think about ancient Mexico, the first civilizations that come to mind are the Incas, Aztecs, and the Maya. However, during the early 1940s, archaeologists uncovered a civilization known as the Olmecs of 1200 BCE, which predated any other advanced civilization in the Americas. The Olmec civilization was one of the most well-known examples of early African presence in America. The civilization, which was of African origin, and dominated by Africans, was the first significant civilization in Mesoamerica and considered the mother culture of Mexico by many historians. This civilization existed between 1200 to 400 BCE in the areas that are known today as the states of Veracruz and Tabasco. One of the main things this civilization is known for is the gigantic stone head carving of their leaders. The carvings clearly depict African faces. This civilization was also responsible for introducing written language, arts, and mathematics to Mesoamerica civilization. The first of these gigantic stone heads were discovered by explorer Jose Melgar in Veracruz in 1862. He wrote,
"What astonished me was the Ethiopic type which it represents. I reflected that there had undoubtedly been blacks in this country."
At this point, the Olmec people were known for their advanced agricultural practices, monumental stone sculptures, and complex social structures. Many historians and archaeologists believe that the Olmec civilization was influenced by African cultures, as evidenced by the similarities in their art and religious practices. Enormous Olmec head statues with African facial characteristics found throughout Central and South America support that Africans had settled in America long before its apparent discovery. Ranging up to 11.15 feet in height and weighing 30 to 40 tons, these statues generally depict helmeted black men with large eyes, broad, fleshy noses, and full lips. An ancient African historian, Professor Van Sertima, has also illustrated how Olmecs were the first Mesoamerican civilization to use a written language, sophisticated astronomy, arts, and mathematics, and they built the first cities in Mexico, all of which greatly influenced the Mayans and subsequent civilizations in the Americas. Michael Coe, a leading historian in Mexico, once remarked,
"There is not the slightest doubt that all later civilizations in Mexico and Central America rest ultimately on an Olmec base."
Another clear indicator of pre-Columbian African transatlantic travel is the recent archaeological findings of narcotics native to America and ancient Egyptian mummies, which have astounded contemporary historians. German toxicologist Svetla Balabanova reported findings of cocaine and nicotine in ancient Egyptian mummies. These substances are known to only be derived from American plants, South American cocaine from Erythroxylon coca, and nicotine from Nicotiana tabacum. Such compounds could only have been introduced to ancient Egyptian culture through trade with Americans. Similarities across early American and African religions also indicate significant cross-cultural contact. The Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas all worship black gods, and the surviving portraits of the black deities are revealing. For instance, ancient portraits of the Quetzalcoatl, a serpent god, and Ecahua, the god of war, are unquestionably Negro with dark skin and woolly hair. Now, why would Native Americans venerate images so unmistakably African if they had never even seen them before? Numerous wall paintings in caves in Juxtlahuaca, southwestern Mexico, depict the famous ancient Egyptian opening of the mouth and cross-libation rituals. All these religious similarities are too large and occur far too often to be mere coincidences. Professor Everett Borders, a U.S. innovator, notes another very important indication of African presence, which is the nature of early American pyramids. Egypt is famous for ancient pyramids, but the Americas actually have more pyramids than any other place in the world. But the Egyptian pyramids are much older and show signs of progress from the earliest pyramids built to the more sophisticated and enormous pyramids that are now famous. However, the pyramids found in Central America do not show the same level of progress. That suggests that whoever built the American pyramids had already mastered pyramid building by the time those pyramids were built, which points the finger to Africans who likely sailed over to the Americas with that knowledge and constructed them in America. The earliest known pyramid in the Americas is found in Tabasco, Mexico, and was built by the Olmecs, the same civilization known for the gigantic stone heads. Therefore, the great ancient civilizations of Egypt and West Africa traveled to the Americas, contributing immensely to early American civilization by importing the art of pyramid building, political systems, and religious practices, as well as mathematics, writing, and a sophisticated calendar. Furthermore, archaeologists have discovered ancient skulls and skeletons that they believe belong to people of African descent. In a 1975 publication by the New York Times, it is stated that a Smithsonian Institution team reported finding 2 Negro male skeletons in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The soil from the earth layers in which the skeletons were found was dated around 1250 AD. Polish professor Andrzej Wiercinski has also testified to the discovery of African skulls at Olmec sites. More ancient skeletons that archaeologists believe are Africans have also been discovered in other locations in Central and South America, further pointing to the fact that Africans had known America's soils way longer than we were made to believe. Most historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, and other scientists and scholars now know that Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. Not only were Native Americans present when he reached the New World, but also Chinese, Phoenicians, and Europeans, among others, had been sailing to the Americas thousands of years before Columbus ventured across the Atlantic. Adding to these facts is a recent book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, written by a brilliant African-American scholar, David Imhotep. Imhotep's thesis is by far the most revolutionary viewpoint ever published on this subject. Unlike his predecessors, he does not claim that Africans simply sailed to the Americas before Columbus and influenced the Native Americans who resided in the New World. No, he states instead that the Native Americans themselves were black Africans who first reached the New World at least 56,000 years ago. Dr. Imhotep shows that there were two major groups that populated ancient America. The first were black Africans who had begun sailing to the New World tens of thousands of years ago. They were short people who appeared to have been the ancestors of modern pygmies. According to Dr. Imhotep, the second group to reach the Americas in ancient times were the Mongolians, who first arrived about 3000 BC. They traveled from Asia across the Bering Strait down through Canada and into North America. There they met Africans who had preceded them. Some Mongolians mixed with the indigenous African, others conquered or exterminated the black people. The black and Mongolian mixture resulted in what we know today as the Red Indian, in other words, the Indian on the original American nickel. The Indian of our school textbooks and the Indian of Hollywood fame do not represent the original Native American. They were indeed early Americans, but they were descendants of indigenous Africans, that is, the first Americans and invading Mongolians. The earliest and most pervasive evidence of their presence are the strange structures called Native American mounds. Built by black Africans, these structures still survive in 41 states of North America. One such mound, the Cahokia of Illinois, is almost as large as the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Additionally, when you consider all the evidence so far mentioned, with the fact that ancient Africans were masters at shipbuilding, it is no brainer that they more than likely made it to the Americas from West to North Africa long before Columbus did. Shipbuilding and sailing have a history of over 20,000 years in the Sahara. There are cave wall paintings of ancient ships documenting this tradition. Ancient Egyptians were pioneers in shipbuilding. One example of this is the ancient Egyptian king Khufu's ship, which is a vessel that is 44 meters long and was buried at the foot of the Khufu's Great Pyramid in Giza. Around 2500 BC, Tai was discovered with its structure still intact in 1954. Furthermore, ancient transatlantic similarities in botany, religion, and pyramid building constitute but a fraction of the signs of African influence in ancient America. Historically, the African people have been exceptional explorers and purveyors of culture across the world. Throughout all of these travels, African explorers have not had a history of starting devastating wars on the people they met. The greatest threat towards Africa having a glorious future is her people's ignorance of Africa's glorious past. Pre-Columbian civilization in the Americas had its foundation built by Africans and developed by the ingenuity of Native Americans. Sadly, America, in post-Columbus times, was founded on the mass killing of the indigenous Americans, built on the backs of African slaves, and continues to run on the exploitation of workers at home and abroad. Sad also is the fact that despite this evidence of early African presence in America, the history of African contributions to the development of the Americas has often been overlooked or marginalized. The legacy of slavery and racism has obscured the true extent of African influence on American culture, society, and history. In truth, Africans began coming to the Americas thousands of years before Columbus, and the evidence of their presence, though systematically ignored by mainstream and K-12 education curriculum, is overwhelming and undeniable. Even early Mexican scholars were convinced that the impact of the black explorers on the New World was profound and enduring. One author, J. Villacorta, would write,
"Any way you view it, Mexican civilization had its origin in Africa."
Indian scholar Rafiq Jairasboy would appear to have been right when he also wrote,
"The black began his career in America not as slave, but as master."
Clearly, Africans helped civilize America a great deal before Europeans discovered America, and well before Europeans claimed to have civilized Africa. The growing body of evidence is now becoming simply too loud to ignore. Hence, it's about time education policymakers re-examine their school curriculums to adjust for America's long pre-Columbian history. To close this, the history of blacks in America extends far beyond the arrival of Columbus in 1492. Glaring evidence suggests that African people were present in the Americas thousands of years before European colonization, challenging traditional narratives of American history. By acknowledging and exploring this rich and complex history, we can gain a deeper understanding of the diverse and interconnected roots of American society. It is crucial to continue researching and sharing these untold stories, to honor the contributions and resilience of black communities throughout history. That brings us to the end of yet another interesting video segment. And if you enjoyed it, then you may kindly support our works by hitting that thumb button in front of you. Share with your friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and subscribe to stay with us all the way if you are yet to. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.